I want to welcome everyone to our second of our HALLO Berlin series. For those of you who don't know, I'm Gloria Kondrup, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. I am doing this series in collaboration with my wonderful co-collaborators, Kristine Bowne, who's the Vice President of Professional Development, Industry and Engagement, and Rob Ball, who is a professor at ArtCenter College of Design and the Managing Director of ArtCenter Berlin. ArtCenter Berlin is a fabulous, fabulous studio that I think we've had for the last, you can help me guys, 10 years or something like that?
2006, so.
2006, it is a long, I didn't realize it was that long. And today we have not only, I can't even say enough about Magdalena. I'm gonna let Maggie Hendrie introduce her. Maggie Hendrie is the chair of our undergraduate interaction department and our graduate media design practices. I don't wanna keep talking because it just takes time away from our guest. So I'm gonna turn it over to Kristine and Rob first, and they will turn it over to Maggie Hendrie to lead the discussion with Magdalena, okay?
Thank you, Gloria.
Thanks, Gloria. I also want to welcome you. We appreciate this a lot, Gloria. This is coming to you, or actually from Germany, where Magdalena is right now, and I'm in Berlin right now. And just briefly, you know, ArtCenter Berlin is a studio, a satellite studio project we have in Berlin. Our first was in 2006. And we host transdisciplinary projects that give students an immersive experience, well, here in this incredible city of Berlin, and how they invest and become part of the city is really a big part of our program. So we take it from being from a traditional studio that you have in ArtCenter College to really being kind of a pop-up studio where we're together every day and we go at a project or a problem and solve it together. So our big thing is investigating and exploration and using Berlin as our backdrop. And it's pretty incredible. And I invite everybody to join us at some point when COVID is over and you can all come here. And in that, you know, my other half of me is Kristine Bowne, who really works with our alums and works with industry in Berlin and in Europe, and connects us in a great way to the bigger family, we like to say. And so she is really helped put this series together. And Kristine?
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I'll just briefly welcome everyone. We're so thrilled to be able to share some of our remarkable network of alumni and industry partners based in Berlin. As Rob mentioned, you know, the studio is a thriving component of ArtCenter's global presence. I've had the opportunity to spend many, many years there exploring opportunities for our students, for internships and recruitment, developing industry partnerships, and reconnecting or maintaining connections with our remarkable alumni, beginning with ArtCenter Europe, which of course was our Swiss school that closed in the mid-90s. All of those alums and ArtCenter's legacy in Europe that they really started is maintained through our presence in Berlin. And we're so honored and excited to share a bit about one of our remarkable alums, Magdalena, and let you learn from her and her remarkable accomplishment and journey with LabTwin. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Maggie Hendrie. I wanted to again thank Gloria Kondrup and Clifford and Susan and Lavinia and the whole HMCT team for all of their support with this series. Maggie?
Thanks, Kristine. Welcome, everybody. And I too want to extend my thanks to all of the team at HMCT, the team in the professional development and industry engagement, as well as our crew over in Berlin, who I miss very much at this time. So Magdalena Paluch began her creative career as an architect before completing her grad ID program here at ArtCenter. Since graduating in 2007, Magdalena has worked in automotive UX for companies like Toyota and Fisker, and then in innovation and technology strategy at BCG Digital Ventures here in the US and also in Berlin. Since February 2019, Magdalena has been the CEO of LabTwin, a life science startup. So welcome, Magdalena. I touched on your bio, but what I'm actually interested in is your path. And what creative path took you to Berlin?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor, and it feels like coming back home and be with the people that are very close to me at ArtCenter. So it's a pleasure to be here. So you asked about my path, the path that led me to Berlin. I actually I don't think I would have thought 5 or 6 years ago, or even earlier, that I would ever live in Berlin. I had no connection to the city. So this actually happened because I was working for, back then I was working for BCG Digital Ventures in our LA office. Mm-hmm. And I was just ready for a change. And so it happened that DV, who I was with almost from the very beginning, grew quite rapidly as well. They expanded to many cities around the globe. And one of the second actually office of DV back then was Berlin location. And I was working with some German clients, even though I was based in LA. And I thought, I'm ready for a change. My family is actually in Poland. It would be nice to be a little bit closer to them. And then I basically made a transfer first, sort of temporarily, to Berlin on a sort of some temporary assignments to our office in Berlin, our DV office in Berlin. And after I was here for a little while, I really enjoyed it, and I thought, okay, I can make this stay a little bit longer. And so now, this was in 2016, and now I'm in Berlin 4 years, and I can't believe how fast it passed.
Yeah, I love that. I noticed when I talk to a lot of designers and creatives that much in hindsight, there's a strategy at the time where I'm just ready for a change, or I'm intrigued, or I'm curious. That's really great to hear. Can you talk a little bit about what is LabTwin and what your role is there?
Sure. So I think it's worth mentioning that I have always been sort of curiosity driven, and when these opportunities, or when these doors sort of crack open, I take the leap. Most of my sort of personal and professional life, that's always been the case. And so this happened with Berlin, but also this happened with LabTwin. So I was actually working in Berlin for the BCG Digital Ventures, building up different ventures. A lot. I was very passionate always around healthcare space. So it happened that this venture, LabTwin, was initially incubated by BCG DV with one of the really large German laboratory instrument manufacturers, Sartorius. And it was similar to other ventures, where we started with a very rough idea. We wanted to come into the lab and figure out how we can digitize the information in the lab. And as probably maybe more of us are nowadays familiar with what it takes to develop a drug. But for us, main challenge was, how can we help digitize the knowledge that happens in a lab and make exploration and innovation in laboratories even more rapid. So our venture, the vision for it was to accelerate innovation by empowering the most creative scientific minds, scientists in laboratories. The the cost and the length and the challenge of bringing drug to market, it takes around over $2 billion over 10 years usually. And that 10 years starts, from, moving from 10,000 molecules to a single molecules that then you can scale and market and bring to customers or to patients. And that is tremendous length. And I think we are now, because of COVID, this is a very sort of, I would say, not so familiar area to many of us. Because of COVID, now we all understand what clinical trials means and how risky and how lengthy this product of actually innovating in life science, especially in biopharma, is. And this is exactly the challenge that we sort of face in the laboratories. When we first begin, we enter laboratories and we realize that they are actually so much behind so many different industries in terms of digitization that we witnessed in every single lab we entered. We witnessed scientists working at the lab, at the bench, performing experiments, and not having access to any sort of digital information, not being able to capture the information digitally, still, writing the information on Post-it notes, on their gloves, and then recording it still in an analog logbook. This is sort of a picture that demonstrates of what some of the more extreme work at the bench looks like. So these scientists, these technicians are gowned, are gloved. It's highly sterile environment that they have to work in. Most of the time, not only their eyes, but their hands have to be focused on what they're doing with the experiment. And 50 to 80% of that their time and their day is actually spent at the bench. And that leads to the fact that information, as you see on these pictures, is quite fragmented. Because can you imagine that the basic sort of thread that makes something experiment move to the next stage is the fact of having good documentation of what you have done. This is, I think, one of the biggest difference between purely creative design process and scientific process, is that the precision and the timing matters so much that it's not, higher humidity in the air in a laboratory can affect the results of your experiment failing or moving forward. So recording all this metadata throughout the process is extremely important. But of course, you can't do that without taking your hands off, degloving, writing things down. So this information is not recorded at all, or it's kept in the memory of the scientist and hopefully recorded like a week later or 2 weeks later. And you can only imagine how much information gets lost in the process. So in essence, you have experimentation and you have documentation, and they're completely separate processes in a lab. And that the fact that they are separated means that a lot of information just get lost. So experiments can move into the next stage as smoothly as they should. And so the idea as LabTwin was born was, can we bring these two processes into one moment in time? So our goal is to help capture and access information in real time at the bench, at the point of experiment, but bringing both experimentation, documentation together. So what LabTwin actually is if you can imagine, the best way to explain it is as a voice first digital lab assistant. So it's not voice, it's voice only. It has actually a visual interface you can interact with, but the voice component and the voice technology enables scientists to be able to interact with information just purely in a hands-free setup. And this quote actually came from one of our users. They compare us to Siri, which is actually quite interesting, because when I explain it to people in a sort of simple manner, I say it's similar to Siri, but Siri with a PhD. So Siri that has been specifically trained for this not only language, but this context. You could see here the two different screens. I actually just pulled up Siri, and And so on the left, you see sort of a very general assistant, such as Siri. And on the right, you see one of the part of our interface from LabTwin, which is just trying to record of what scientist is doing. And the same text is captured at LabTwin, specifically as scientists would write it down in the lab log book. On the left, you could see what Siri has made out of what the same text that we're trying to record. So the context and the knowledge that's very specific to this discipline makes LabTwin sort of a vertical AI solution for this specific domain.
Wow. So I have a huge number of questions for you because your work is right at the intersection of scientific knowledge development, creative technology, creativity, being a CEO. So I wanted to start by backing into a little bit of a question. There are very few CEOs in high tech, maybe out with the founders of Airbnb, who are designers. So I wonder if you could talk just for a moment about what is it about the design practice and your experience that informs building a company and doing that type of institutional and organizational design, and also taking a risk, being a CEO?
It's a good question. And something that I thought about a lot before I took on this opportunity, because as I mentioned, I helped build this venture when it was still incubated within DV. And actually, the reason I took, or how this opportunity came, or how I became a CEO, was on request from the CEO of Sartorius, which is the company that funded LabTwin. We were in the process of looking for and hiring actually CEO, and I was leading that effort of CEO and the whole executive team into LabTwin before I was planning to return to DV to yet just build another venture. And we couldn't find a good fit. And he came to one of the DV partners that was managing the venture and said, "Why not Magdalena? Why couldn't she be a CEO?" And the first thing that this partner said was, "Well, she doesn't have any sales experience." And the CEO of Sartorius said, "Well, she can hire people that have sales experience." And it's sort of, and I ended up taking, long story short, I ended up taking the opportunity because as I saw the role and as the role was sold to me in a way, was you actually don't have to have this deep expertise area. What you have to have a talent and you have to have a skill and expertise in is how to ensure that all this expertise, you have the right people on the bus, as you may call it. So, and then you know how to actually work with people and how to manage teams, how to design teams, and how to run them in order to make sure that all the areas that a startup needs to deliver on are being delivered on. So from that capacity, I think, not just design, but the fact that I was in a point of my career where I run and manage different disciplines, not only design, but different disciplines, such as engineering, such as venture architects, just business development. It allowed me to have the expertise to now actually scale and sort of spin off a team like that and lead it with confidence. But I think, going back to your question, think like what makes a CEO a good designer, or what makes a good CEO, what makes a designer a good CEO? I think it's the fact that is, and I have it here, curiosity-led. I think most designers are very much curiosity-led, and still specifically in the area and the domain that I am working in, this is critical. and sort of being able to question, being able to see things from new perspective, being able to relearn things. That's I think a very, very good trait. I think being open to new ideas. So thinking solution rather than problem orientation. So creative problem solving. That's another trait of many designers that helps, because at the end, as a CEO, you are faced every day or every hour with challenges that may come from a completely different area, and you need to be able to ready to tackle them. I think telling a story is a powerful one. So I think designers are not only visual, but great storytellers, and that helps in every aspect of a CEO's job, being in sales, being in marketing, being able to motivate your team in a difficult times, and being people-centric. So the human centricity that is often a core of what we are trying to think about through ethnography, is being able to step to others' shoes. This helps, again, it helps from a perspective of understanding the problems you're trying to solve as a company, but also it allows you to be a much better leader for the organization and for the people within organization, and be able to see how to pair people the best ways in order to enhance what they're doing, being able to see where people need to develop. All of that is tremendously helpful, I think.
So I'm intrigued by two things. One is your comment on being human-centered, and the second is this photo, right? Being curiosity-led. Obviously here in Pasadena, we're right next door to Caltech. We often have the opportunity to work with scientists. And what I found is that there's a kind of elasticity of expertise, right? Where people who are postdocs, PhDs, plus 20 years experience, may not necessarily recognize that when we say, can you show me? There's an expertise in that question, right? Because we're novices in their domain. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of being, and the opportunities of being a designer in a domain that has a great reputation for trustworthiness, credibility, and these are earned, right? And what is it like, and how did you learn to go into those environments and both demonstrate your value and expertise, but also learn from their actual human process?
Yeah. So I think the fact that I am actually very much curiosity driven was a huge sort of underlying support of this process, because with curiosity comes growth mindset. So to me, this is sort of new. It's not a chore for me now to learn about this discipline. This is incredibly exciting and sort of invigorating to learn more about biopharma, about genetics. Like these are areas that are inherently very interesting to me. And so you have to do some homework, of course. By homework, I mean, I have spent a lot of hours taking classes and courses to support me. Of course, I can't get a microbiology degree in after hours, and it's too late for me. But that's sort of, there is some work that I had to do in order to try to really walk in the shoes as much as I could of the scientist. So that was sort of a secondary work. I just took classes online, trying to learn more about their world. Secondly, it's building the organization. So it is a little bit like learning new language. And in this world, you actually, as designers, you actually taught to appreciate the fact that taking almost a naive perspective could be extremely beneficial, because you could see something from another perspective. However, when you come to a very scientific domains, you can't quite go that far. You still, you know, when you ask the 5 whys, have to be the right moments, and to know when these right moments are, you need to understand a little bit of the domain, and you need to have this expertise. That's why this comes helpful. So it is a little bit like learning a new language. And so learning as a new language, you do some homework, you do some studying like I did, but also it's extremely helpful to immerse yourself in the context of this new language. And for that was me and others who joined, who didn't have experience in life science, was very much working hand in hand, observing, shadowing, even doing the experiments in our labs. We have a very small lab actually in our office. And it was hiring people that spoke the language. So a big portion of our team are actually scientists, or they have scientist experience in the past. And now we sort of develop them, or they're being developed into different disciplines. We have scientists in sales, we have scientists in marketing. And these scientists on our teams basically teach everyone else that doesn't have a scientific background of what matters. So it is this sort of everyday speaking of the language in a context of the people we have on a team that also makes it easy to make this domain more understandable to me and also to others that don't have the background.
In a lot of our conversations, Magdalena, you've talked about language. It comes up again and again in our conversations. And I'm struck by the fact that your tool is all around AI and voice, language, natural user language. I've noticed that many people are talking about AI, but not many people are talking about how to design with agents of technology. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your insights on how to incorporate principles and practices in algorithmic design, artificial intelligence in this case, and voice.
We're still learning, I think, as everyone else, because we don't necessarily have a true AI yet. And actually, when I do give talks or when I speak about it, I try to refer it to as machine learning, because we're not quite there yet. And I think especially designing something into a scientific domain, you need to build this trust. And we've always, from the very beginning, we had the vision of building something that will not replace, but augment or enhance the work that scientists do from day to day. And so you have to be, especially in our domain, you have to be careful of not overstepping and not over-promising, first of all, that this is, this artificial intelligence, because it comes with a big sort of expectation package of what the assistant can or cannot do. And I think simply when you're designing for that, it is always helpful to think about how would this relate in real life. First of all, if I was to hire my personal assistant, I would not expect that personal assistant to know everything from the day one or know how to interact with. I would have to spend a significant amount of time to actually training, sharing, giving my preferences, working with that person to sort of learn how to best work with me and how to best support me and what I need to share in order for her or him to do her part of work. And I think it's very similar here. And so partially it's building this expectation that this is new and this assistant will evolve with time, but it requires a certain openness to feed data, feed information, correct in some cases the assistant so it can get better and support the scientist or technician better.
I was going to ask you about the phenomena you observed in your participatory design sessions, where the scientists started to reformulate their natural language into to provide more structured data versus the unstructured data we get with most natural language systems.
Yeah, so with voice is a very different format, and like you said, we're designing with language, and designing with language is very different because we think that voice is just such a natural way of recording things, but in reality, the way we think and the way we speak is very different. So the connection between thinking and writing something down is a very different mental process and mental mode than thinking and speaking. And what we've noticed is the scientists wanted to have data in a specific format. And this could relate to the information being more structured, or the information being just simply more clean, or actually being in a final form of a sentence that you would like to actually just put it in a report directly. And what you find is that often when you just speak, it is not so precise, or it's not so well composed as you would think about it and write it down. So what we saw after a while, the scientists actually changed their behavior and started to speak differently in order to get to a specific outcome of information that now it's being recorded. And that included making certain breaks, or speaking in whole sentences, because they just wanted to have a shortcut to actually just sending this data very quickly to their report. And we saw actually opportunity for some said that actually they improved the way they speak, because they have been more cognizant on the way they have to record the information, because now they've been actually they've been exposed to the way they speak in a very sort of vivid form as it comes out.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, because I think a lot in interaction design, how we're always trying to grasp the mental model of the people who are engaged with the system, and to see that language is such a dynamic glue, if you like, between the mental model and the actual data model. I don't think we get to see it quite that vividly in other domains, right? Which voice is very particular to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, scientists proceed oftentimes by like skepticism, right? It's the skeptical approach. What are their fears and concerns about meeting a group of designers who say we can help you by using voice and algorithmic design?
Well, you have to prove that it works, right? So I think, as we talked earlier, I said this is actually this group of the segment of users is considered skeptics, and for the right reasons, because they all their life they have been the process guides them and forces them to find proofs for any claims they make, and so that also is something that they demand from a product or technology that they are asked to try. Of course, compared to maybe a B2C company or a B2B company in a different industry, in our industry, we actually have to have use cases where we can demonstrate that this worked here and here, and we have proven ROI that has been recorded in a specific way. And also, because it's a new category, it is helpful to give them examples of how exactly it was used, or how to apply LabTwin in the specific workflows. So the skepticism can be overcome if you take the role of an educator. That even starts earlier, before you even show the product. A lot of what we do in sort of marketing area is actually creating white papers on their processing, how their processes can be changed with LabTwin as sort of an enhancer to their workflows. So I think you can overcome this, but you have to actually have a proof that it works, and it takes a lot of trial and error in-house before you actually release it to the customers.
Yeah. So who owns and who has the opportunity to, for example, aggregate the data and look at metadata, and to start to see those kind of super level patterns emerge?
All the data that we collect is owned by our customers. So what we try to do, and what we what we do for them is we help to, right now, what they don't have as much is that metadata that informs the experiment. So what they often don't have is, because it's so difficult to actually document as you're doing, you will skip certain steps or recording of it, and that metadata is missing, or a temperature of something, or the specific deviations, because now you added, you aliquoted a little bit larger amount, and you think like, it's not so important to record, I'll just remember that next time, but you don't. So that metadata, they don't collect right now because there is a barrier to that. That is something that we collect, and what we do as well is we help clean and label that data. So then they can actually take that and try and make patterns or harmonize certain things based on the way we reformat or label. This is connected a little bit with your previous question, that at the end, they can draw more value if the data is more complete and also it's more clean. And that's what we help them with.
I think it's interesting that when a lot of initiatives start, they're rightly in the service of the science and the scientific process for these laboratory processes. At what point and how do you think that the technology is going to start to shape and form how the lab experimentation is designed?
I think it depends on the level of granularity, right? So I think when you ask, if you're asking how long until these systems or this learning models can actually predict outcome of experiments, I think there we have a little bit longer way to go compared to AI in different areas, because a lot of the, if you compare, for example, AI models or machine learning models that work in an area that's well known. So if machine learning is to win a chess match, the world of chess and the outcomes and the information that the machine learning can draw from is vast, and it's something that can be mined, versus a lot of the areas of the science, we don't know the outcomes yet. Nobody knows the outcomes yet. So it's a little bit more difficult to predict. And in some cases, it's easier. So it depends on a degree of sort of machine being able to define or predict some of the models. On a level of purely workflow enhancement automation, that can happen already today. So there is, let's say there's 12 scientists in one group working on one research, and it's natural to humans to do things their own way. And so that implies that every experiment is run by a different scientist. There is variation of how they run it. Sure. So there is a lack of standardization and harmonization that comes with that. If you have a system that records how this is being done, you can much easier sort of recommend and sort of bring harmonization into the process amongst different individuals, but also different groups. And on that level of sort of small alterations of the processes that is happening with LabTwin today.
Yeah. So do scientists continue to write first and then speak, or do they adopt these new communication styles over time? Can you talk a little bit about their spoken and written language preferences?
It is both, but because LabTwin offers this hands-free ability to record something, there are cases where they couldn't even write something down, or there are cases where there are two scientists or two technicians used or work on one experiment, because one is actually conducting the work while the other one is just recording the results. The other one is basically doing what LabTwin is doing. So in some cases, this replaces the work of another technicians or scientists. And in that case, because it's such a hands-free specific use case, they speak first. In other cases, because scientists move across the lab, different benches using different instruments, there might be work that they're doing at the bench where they don't have gloves on and they can actually interact with the system with their hands on. So in that case, it may be easier for them to just write something down if contamination is not a challenge and they have their hands free. But we see both. It depends on depending on the use case.
Magdalena, I've got a number of questions I want to ask you about why Berlin. But before I go there, I wonder, do you have any other slides that you want to share with us about the lab and the work you're doing?
I am not sure. I have this one actually that I wanted to share, which actually goes back to what I was explaining about designing. How is it different to be a CEO, and that at the end, the process of designing and running organization can be very much compared to any design challenge. As long as you maintain this human centricity. And I bring up this picture because this is a couple of our employees, and they kids. And this is our Thanksgiving, I think, last year. And these small girls basically painted our logos with some actually really good line, like "never stop questioning," and that was sort of their gift to me on the Thanksgiving. But just get to saying that, like, designing organization is about people and it's about creating a culture, and I think that is the most interesting, and this is the most challenging, but also the most rewarding at the end.
So that brings me to Berlin, right? Why
Yes.
Berlin? And what is it about the culture and the startup environment and the creative environment there that makes LabTwin possible?
So first of all, I think it's the diversity. So for an example of LabTwin, we are a 40-something people team. Amongst this 30 few people, we have 22 nationalities represented. So that just demonstrates of how much diversity Berlin has to offer, and that probably wouldn't be as possible in many different cities. So the diversity that Berlin attracts, it's I would say it's a very non-German city in Germany. It's quite metropolitan, and diversity is number one. Two, Berlin is a hub of startups and innovation, and it has been for a while. And the reason for that is that it's actually still very accessible and affordable. That startups have much easier way of actually building up a company here, especially when the company is centered around emerging technologies, where I think what we do, what LabTwin does, if we had to do this in California, we would be forced to having much smaller team and probably would have to go much slower in our development. So the affordability of that the city offers definitely helps there.
I was wondering about the people who come to Berlin, right? It's the kind of magnet for a lot of startup creatives and people who are willing to take risks from all across Europe and elsewhere. So what is it in the qualities of the people that you've been able to hire that has supported you in your work?
I think that it's people that have certain. Berlin is often a stop. It's almost, I feel like a lot of people that are in Berlin are here in passing, which means that they have already lived not in one place all their life, but they have they have relocated in many different areas of the world. And I think that makes them having different cultural imprints that they bring with them, which makes it so much, speaks to diversity, but speaks to the fact of these different cultures coming together and people being actually aware of these different cultures and how they work differently. I think that makes it somewhat special. People usually come here and usually stay here for 4 or 5 years, and they may move somewhere else, and that makes it more interesting.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to take a moment to take some questions and some considerations from people who are on the panel and other attendees. But before we do that, I have a question for you. All right, so you're designing, studying life science in the evening, designing a company, working in a new context. How do you keep up your, it's a classic question, right? How do you keep up your creative inspiration, your creative juice? Where does it come from right now?
I think a lot of it comes from learning. So I am lucky that I actually am interested in this domain that I am working in right now. So I'm extremely interested in biology and genetics and biohacking. All of those areas are just my passion areas. So the fact that I'm studying after, like, in the evenings or weekends, these areas are not just so I can be more informed of what our customers are doing, but because I see so much potential for innovation in this area. Even bringing science and design together, I feel like very often I meet scientists that, and that's the second area where I draw my inspiration from. I work with a lot of scientists that I have done science and either have idea for something, but they don't know how to take it off the ground, or they want to move beyond science and do something else. So actually speaking to them about their ideas, how they see the world, is very invigorating and also inspiring. So I think these two areas that are working well with my domain.
Yeah, that's a really great insight, actually, that scientists and engineers are not stuck in place either. They too are innovative and curious and have a career and creative path too, right? That actually brings me to the very first of our questions that are in the Q&A, if you're open to taking some more questions. And the first one is actually close to what we're just talking about, and it's from Ibrahim. And Ibrahim is asking that, if I understand rightly, that the element of subjectivity is so vital in the world of creatives, right? And it's inherently not valuable in science necessarily, right? Or at least that's the impression we get. So how do you build credibility as a designer?
It's a very good question. I think something that I will always struggle with to some extent. I think one way is people you have around you and people you have on a team. So to be honest, like, I am not an expert in this field, or not as big of an expert of someone that comes from this domain. However, I have scientists on my team, and they are extremely knowledgeable. And the only way to build credibility is actually to dedicate specific experts to specific topics, and allow them to sort of shine, but also to take lead on certain topics or problems.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to me. It's so frequent that it's almost a cliche, right? But we talk about the imposter syndrome. And I'm interested, and I share with you a path of having consulted, having been in startup, having been in design. And the sense of being an imposter is just permanent, right? So it's just like, I always recommend, just get used to that, right? It's just, that's what it's like to be uncomfortable. And it's always outweighed by curiosity and fascination and the ability to show something, right? And through doing that, I think in general public, we sometimes underestimate that a lot of scientists live in the gray zone too. That's where their discovery and their hypotheses live, right? So I guess those are the kind of questions, at least I hear from some of our students, is how do you manage all of that and still feel that you can move into a new domain or take a new risk, such as starting a company, right? And I wondered, when you think about that in hindsight, if you have any comments or words of wisdom for people who are questioning, how do you juggle all of those different facets of self? I'm an imposter, I've got a great idea, believe in me, I can help build a team.
I think it's easier to say now. I think it comes with experience and you actually taking a lot of those chances and risks, is I'll just do it. I think I remember actually from grad school, from ArtCenter, I was very often told, if it's not a challenge, if it doesn't feel painful, it's not growth. And it's exactly that. So I often question myself. And when I'm now a little bit more self-aware, so when I find myself questioning for a little bit too long, I just try to shut that part of my brain out and just say, just do it. And what's the worst can happen? And actually, this is before I took this opportunity, I was asked exactly this question, because I've never been a CEO, I've never been in this role. This is a new domain. There's a lot of newness to this. And before I took it, I very clearly laid out my strength as it relates to this challenge and my areas of development, let's say, the areas that I don't have. And I was told that, well, these areas that I don't have, like the strength is that you know that these are the areas of potential development, and that's sort of a sign of leadership to begin with. And second of all, what do I have? What's the risk? Like, what's the worst can happen? And I think this is often like a helpful question, just sort of thinking through the scenario. Okay, if everything goes like the worst possible, what is that? So and then move on and think, okay, what's the best it can happen, and make it very vivid. Imagine that moment where it actually all works out, and then just do it.
Very fascinating listening to you, Magdalena, as we have a few minutes left. I think and Maggie mentioned the concept of the imposter. It's something that designers have to be untaught. I think it's a great, right? We have to be untaught that we are imposters, because for some reason, and I think you are a great example of the next step in design. Design is not necessarily just about visual communication, it's about structure and organization. And I wonder if you can talk to how your customers perceive what you're doing. And what is your customer base at this point for Twin Labs, and how is it expanding?
Do you mean how customers see me as an individual, or how they see LabTwin?
I think LabTwin, because I think after a certain point, they don't look at you as, oh, Magdalena is a designer, you're the CEO of, sorry, not Twin Lab, LabTwin.
Yeah.
But so what is your base like, and how do you perceive it expanding in your mind as the CEO?
Yeah, I think what helps there, actually, like the fact that they don't see me as a designer, comes from the fact that I tried very hard to set it up this way, because I have people that I want them to be on the front lines. I don't necessarily want to, and I don't need to be in a front line, in a center always. And that's why it comes from recognizing, okay, who needs to take a lead here? Who needs to be a face for this campaign? And it's not always me, and doesn't need to be me. So I think removing your ego, I think that helps just on a personal level. On a sort of company level, well, we are an enterprise focused company. So our customers are large enterprises, large pharma, biopharma, even chemical companies. So I think there, what helps is that I actually do have a background, and a large portion of my team has a background in working with top executives in these large enterprises. And me, as well as few others, have expertise in actually leading these organizations on a very high levels through digitization or digitization process. So actually that knowledge and knowing how to cross-pollinate either that from either different industries is actually also quite valuable, because usually if you in one industry like pharma, you only learn on innovation of what the future of pharma will be, but they have so much to learn from other industries. I would say, what we do is so relevant. I always think about automotive industry, because the use case of actually driving a car with, hands on the wheel, but interacting with information. In some ways, there's a lot of parallels you can draw to the context of laboratory and the work at the bench as well.
Great. Well, I think if we don't have any more questions, it's the hour is approaching where we have to sign off. Magdalena, Maggie, and Magdalena, I want to thank you both for having just a really fascinating conversation, and to show, I feel very proud, not only as an ArtCenter alum, but as an ArtCenter instructor, that it really shows how design has grown so much in the last 20 years in terms of its influence beyond, just being visual communicators and language communicators. You've really shown the importance of design is important to solving a lot of issues and problems. And as you say, coming up with solutions. That's what designers do. So I thank you, Rob. I thank you, Kristine, and everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at our next HALLO Berlin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Magdalena, Maggie, Gloria, Rob. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.